All right, so we're diving into cell transport today. Thanks to you guys for sending in that handout from Dr. Eldeeb. It's really going to blow your mind. We're going to be looking at cells like mini cities
Oh, yeah.
with their own little transportation networks, you know?
It is a fantastic analogy.
Yeah.
How do they deal with all that traffic and
Right.
logistics?
How do they manage it all?
Exactly. And a great place to start is the cell membrane. That's think of it as the city walls. It controls what goes in and what goes out.
Okay, so the membrane is the city limits. Got it.
Yeah,
But I'm guessing, like, not everything needs a special pass to get through, right?
absolutely.
There's got to be some things that just slip right in.
You got it. Those small uncharged molecules, oxygen, carbon dioxide,
Yeah,
they
yeah.
just glide right through.
Straight through the membrane.
Right through the lipid bilayer, no problem.
Wow.
It's called simple diffusion.
Okay.
And it's all driven by this thing called a concentration gradient.
Concentration gradient.
It basically means they move from where there's a lot of them to where there's fewer of them.
Oh.
Like a crowd spreading out in a park.
So they kind of just follow the flow.
Exactly.
Okay, so simple diffusion, that's for those tiny guys.
Right.
But wait, what about water? Water's like super important, right?
Oh, absolutely. Water's critical.
Does it need like a special ticket to get into the cell?
Well, it's a little different with water.
Okay.
Water, it's small enough to actually squeeze through,
Really?
Even though it's not lipid soluble itself, it can kind of slip through tiny gaps in the lipid bilayer.
So it sneaks in.
Sneaks in. That's a good way to put it. That's how vital it is.
Wow. Okay. So we've got the little molecules covered.
Yep.
But what about the big stuff? Like proteins and nutrients, stuff that cells really need to work.
You're right. Those are like the building materials, the food supplies for the city.
Exactly.
And for those, we've got something called facilitated diffusion.
Facilitated diffusion.
Yeah. Imagine it as the city's public transportation system.
Ooh, interesting.
Like specialized routes for different molecules.
Okay, like specific bus lines.
Yeah, exactly. And the buses, in this case, are proteins
Proteins.
embedded right in the cell membrane.
Wow. Okay, so each protein only carries certain molecules.
You got it. It's a pretty efficient system.
Okay, but hold on.
Yeah.
What about during, like, rush hour, when everybody's trying to get on the bus at the same time?
That's a great question. You're thinking about competition and saturation.
Oh, okay. Tell me about that.
So competition, that's when you've got, a bunch of similar molecules all vying for the same protein.
Like fighting for a seat on the bus.
Exactly. And then
Right.
there's saturation,
Okay.
which means, well, even with perfect traffic, there's a limit to how much can be transported at once.
So there are only so many seats on the bus.
Exactly. If all the proteins are full, the transport rate just can't go any higher, even if there's more stuff waiting.
Okay, so even with facilitated diffusion, there's a speed limit.
Right.
Makes sense. But thinking about this city analogy more, if these cells are like little bustling cities, don't they also need like a power grid?
You're hitting on a very important point, and that brings us to active transport, the real powerhouse of the cell.
Oh, okay.
Active transport, it requires energy, like actual fuel,
Real?
ATP. That's the cell's energy currency.
Okay.
And it uses this energy to move molecules against their concentration gradient.
Against it. So not just following the flow.
It's more like swimming upstream. It takes effort. You need that fuel.
Okay, active transport sounds pretty intense. Well, what's a good example of that?
One of the most important examples is the sodium-potassium pump.
The sodium-potassium pump.
Imagine it as a revolving door on the cell membrane.
Okay.
Constantly pumping sodium ions out of the cell and potassium ions in.
So it's like constantly moving things.
Yeah, but it's not just moving things around. It's also creating an electrical gradient across the membrane.
An electrical gradient.
More positive charge on the outside,
Yeah.
more negative charge on the inside.
Oh, wow. What's that for?
That gradient. It's essential for nerve and muscle function,
Really?
like keeping the city's lights on and the communication networks running smoothly.
Wow. Okay, so without this pump, things would shut down.
Pretty much. Our cells and ultimately our bodies would just grind to a halt. No thinking, no moving, not even a heartbeat.
That puts it into perspective. So we've got simple diffusion just cruising through, facilitated diffusion with its little bus routes, and then active transport, the workhorse.
Yeah.
What else is there in our cellular transport network?
Well, there's also this really cool process called osmosis. It's all about water movement,
Okay.
And it's not about water like being attracted to other molecules or anything like that. It's more about balancing things out.
Balancing.
Yeah, imagine like two areas, right?
Okay.
Separated by this semi-permeable membrane.
Okay, like a filter.
Yeah, like a filter. And let's say one side has a higher concentration of dissolved stuff, like a lot of salt, for example.
Okay, lots of salt.
That actually means it has less free water molecules
Oh, interesting.
because all that salt is taking up space.
Right. Less room for the water to move around.
Exactly. So water will naturally flow from the area with more free water molecules.
So lower salt concentration.
Right, to the area with fewer free water molecules.
A higher salt concentration.
Until it all evens out.
Yeah.
Like water always tries to find its own level, you know?
So it's not like water is actually attracted to the salt or anything.
Yeah, no, not at all.
It's more like it's just trying to balance out the concentration on both sides.
Exactly. And this whole process, osmosis, it's super important for maintaining the shape and volume of our cells.
Oh, right.
Like too much water flows in, the cell could like burst. Imagine an overinflated balloon.
Oh, yeah.
Too much flows out and it shrivels up like a raisin.
That's a delicate balance.
It really is.
It makes you think, like, how important it must be for those cells to control that water flow.
Oh, absolutely. And that's why, for example, hospitals use, what do they call it? Isotonic saline solutions.
Isotonic.
Yeah, that means they have the same salt concentration as their body fluids,
Okay.
around 0.9% NaCl.
Okay.
And that prevents those, drastic volume changes that could be, like, really dangerous for our cells.
Wow. Okay. It's amazing how these things that seem so simple are actually, like, so vital.
Yeah.
But before we move on, I'm still kind of curious about that sodium-potassium pump.
Yeah.
You were saying how it creates an electrical gradient.
Right.
But how does that actually, like, translate to things like nerve impulses?
Ah, good question. So remember how the pump is always moving sodium out and potassium in?
Yeah.
That creates this difference in charge across the membrane, right?
Okay.
We call that the membrane potential.
Membrane potential.
It's like the cell's own tiny battery.
The cell's little power source.
Is-
So how does that battery actually, like, fire up a nerve signal?
All right, picture this. When a nerve gets stimulated,
Okay.
let's say you touch a hot stove,
Ouch.
channels in the membrane open up, and sodium ions rush into the cell.
Like the floodgates open.
That's a great way to put it. And all that positive charge flowing in, it changes the membrane potential, making the inside of the cell less negative.
Okay.
We call that depolarization.
Depolarization.
And if that depolarization reaches a certain level, it's like, boom, it triggers this chain reaction.
Okay.
Like a line of dominoes falling over, opening up even more sodium channels further down the nerve.
So it's like this wave of depolarization.
Exactly. That's what carries the signal down the nerve.
It's amazing how these, like, tiny little events can have such huge effects.
It really is.
On the whole body, even.
And as that wave travels, those sodium channels close up quickly and potassium channels open up, letting potassium flow out. That restores the negative charge inside. It's like resetting the system, getting it ready for the next signal.
Okay, I get it.
This whole process, depolarization, then repolarization, that's what we call an action potential, the actual electrical impulse that travels down the nerve.
So it's this carefully choreographed dance of ions flowing in and out, generating that electrical signal.
Yeah, a beautiful dance.
But how does an electrical signal actually make something happen? Like, how does it make me pull my hand away from that hot stove?
Well, for that, we need to talk about synapses.
Synapses.
That nerve impulse eventually reaches the end of the nerve fiber, and that's the synapse.
Okay.
Here's the thing. The electrical signal gets converted into a chemical signal.
Oh, so it's like a relay race.
Yeah, passing the baton.
From electrical to chemical.
Exactly. The action potential reaching the synapse, that triggers the release of these things called neurotransmitters. They're like chemical messengers.
Chemical messengers.
They travel across this tiny gap to the next cell.
So the message kind of jumps the gap using these chemicals.
Right. And that next cell, it could be another nerve cell, it could be a muscle cell, all sorts of things.
Okay.
And then those neurotransmitters bind to receptors on that receiving cell.
Okay.
And that can cause all sorts of things to happen.
Like in the example of the hot stove.
Exactly. In that case, those neurotransmitters might tell the muscle self to contract and pull your hand away from the heat.
It's incredible how fast all this happens.
It is. I mean, it really shows how incredibly fast and efficient our bodies are.
We've evolved to, like, respond to our environment in a split second.
Exactly. And it's all thanks to these tiny little molecular interactions.
That's like the city's emergency response system.
Yeah.
Kicking in immediately.
Great analogy.
Right.
And this kind of like rapid response is happening constantly all over your body, regulating everything from your heartbeat to your breathing to how you digest your food.
Speaking of digestion, we've been talking a lot about how these individual cells work, but I'm curious about how these processes work together in
Mm.
like a larger system.
Ah, you're thinking about the digestive system.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a perfect example. It really shows how all these different transport mechanisms cooperate to break down food, absorb nutrients, all that good stuff.
That's a perfect transition. Let's dive into that. So, the digestive system, the ultimate supply chain, right, for our little cellular cities,
Yeah.
taking in all that raw material, breaking it down.
Exactly. It's amazing, really. A perfect example of how all those different transport mechanisms we talked about actually work together.
Right. Each one has its own like special role to play.
Yep. And it all starts in the mouth, of course. You've got enzymes and saliva starting to break down those carbs.
Right.
But
Mm.
the real action, the real star of the show, that's the small intestine.
The small
A
intestine.
masterpiece of absorption, really.
I remember learning about those villi, those finger-like projections, right?
Oh, yeah. The villi. And even tinier ones on those called microvilli.
Microvilli. It's like a whole other level.
Yeah. They're essential for efficient absorption because they increase the surface area so much.
Oh, right. Surface area. More space for stuff to cross over.
Exactly. And lining those villi, you've got these specialized cells, enterocytes.
Enterocytes, okay?
Think of them as the gatekeepers, controlling what gets absorbed.
So they're deciding who gets into the city and who doesn't.
And they're packed with transporter proteins, each one designed to move specific nutrients across.
So it's like each nutrient has its own like customs official.
Yeah, that's a great way to think about it.
Some using facilitated diffusion, some active transport. It's like they've got the whole toolbox.
Absolutely. Like, take glucose, for instance, the cell's primary energy source.
Right.
It gets transported across those enterocytes using a sodium-dependent co-transporter.
Sodium dependent. So is that like that secondary active transport we were talking about?
You got it. Glucose kind of hitches a ride with sodium, which is moving down its concentration gradient. It's like using the flow of one thing to power the movement of another.
Clever. So efficient.
Right. So then once those nutrients are inside those enterocytes,
Yeah.
they move through the cell and get released into those tiny blood vessels,
Blood vessels.
the capillaries. They're woven all through the villi.
Okay.
And from there, it's back to simple diffusion and facilitated diffusion again.
So the nutrients just flow into the bloodstream following the concentration gradient.
Exactly. It's like a perfectly choreographed ballet,
All these different transport mechanisms working together in sync.
keeping the city running. And it's important to remember this kind of intricate dance isn't just happening in our digestive system.
Oh, right. It's everywhere.
It's in every cell, every tissue, every organ, constantly working to keep things balanced, keep us alive.
This has been an amazing deep dive.
I agree.
I'm like seriously blown away by how complex and yet how efficient these processes are.
Yeah.
And all happening at a scale we can't even see.
It really is a testament to the beauty and wonder of biology.
It is. And it makes you think like even the tiniest little disruption in those transport systems could have huge consequences for our health.
Oh, absolutely. These transport processes, they're fundamental to life, and when they go wrong, it can lead to all sorts of diseases.
Like we touched on diabetes earlier, right?
Right, where glucose transport is disrupted, or, cystic fibrosis, where there's a faulty chloride transporter in the lungs.
So much can go wrong.
It really highlights why understanding these basic processes is so important.
It's not just about like satisfying curiosity.
It's about developing treatments, improving health, all of that.
Well, I think we did it. We took this complex topic, cell transport, and we broke it down.
Made it digestible, you could say.
And we used analogies, real-world examples, really brought it to life.
And I think we showed how crucial these processes are.
For life itself, really.
Ah.
So next time you feel your heartbeat or you take a breath, just take a moment to appreciate all those amazing things happening inside you.
It's a microscopic miracle.
It really is.
And remember, this is just the beginning.
Right. Always more to learn, more to explore.
Stay curious out there.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the world of your cells. We'll catch you next time.